The night the waitress answered back in the middle of a glittering rooftop restaurant high above the city. With glass walls shining and soft music playing, everything went quiet at once. A young waitress in a simple black uniform stood beside a table, her hand still holding a silver tray. Across from her sat a famous billionaire in a dark suit that probably cost more than her entire yearly rent, his watch flashing under the lights. Three important guests sat with him, staring in shock. Just a few seconds earlier, he had turned his face away from her, switched into a foreign language and said cruel things about her, thinking she could not understand a single word. He laughed under his breath, his guests gave small unsure smiles, and he waved his hand like she was just air. But then in front of everyone, the quiet waitress opened her mouth and began to speak in the exact same language, with a calm, clear voice that cut through the room like a knife. She repeated his own insult back to him, word for word, and then added her own words that called out his pride, his disrespect, and his cold heart. Every person at that table froze. One of the guests almost dropped his chopsticks. The billionaire's smile vanished, and his eyes went wide like someone had just slapped him across the face without touching him at all. He stared at the waitress like she had turned into a completely different person. He had tried to crush her in a language he used only to show off. Instead, she had just used that same language to show everyone who he really was. Before I tell you exactly how she turned the whole night upside down and why that one moment would follow him for the rest of his life, tell me something first. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to the beginning of how a nobody waitress ended up shocking a powerful man in front of his own guests. That day started like any other long, heavy day for the young woman carrying plates instead of dreams. Her name was not written on any office door. It was written on a tiny name tag pinned to her black shirt. She was 24, with tired eyes that still held a spark she kept hidden from most people. Every morning she woke up before the sun in a small apartment with peeling paint and a window that did not close properly, letting in the cold and the noise from the street. The alarm on her old phone rang at 5:00 a.m., and like every other morning she lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ache in her feet before they even touched the floor. Beside her bed, on a wooden chair that acted as a nightstand, sat a stack of books with bent covers and sticky notes poking out from every side. Some were thick textbooks. Some were small notebooks full of her handwriting. On top of that pile lay an old college ID card with her face on it, younger and full of hope. Under the card was a photo of her and her little brother on the day of his middle school graduation, both of them smiling wide. She picked up the photo and touched it gently like it might break, then set it back down and reached for the envelope with the red overdue stamp. She had read that word so many times that she could probably see it in her sleep. Rent was late. Again. On the wall she had taped a small piece of paper with a list written in neat letters. Rent, food, school fees for Noah, mom's medicine. She whispered each word like a promise, then got up to start another day of trying to keep all those promises with tips and tired feet. The restaurant where she worked was on the top floor of one of the tallest hotels in the city. People came there to feel important and rich for a night, to take photos with the skyline behind them, to eat tiny plates of food that cost more than her entire grocery list. She took the bus there every morning with her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her old sneakers on her feet, and her work shoes in a plastic bag on her lap. On the bus, people scrolled on their phones, watched videos, argued on calls. She did something different. She pulled out a small notebook with scribbles all over it and read quietly, her lips moving but no sound coming out. The words inside were not in English. They were from a language most people around her never heard in real life. She had started learning it in high school after a teacher showed a video of a city full of bright signs and busy streets on the other side of the world. The sounds of that language had stayed in her head like music. In college, she had been at the top of her class in that subject. She had even been chosen for an exchange program once, a chance to actually visit that country. But life does not always care about your plans. Her mom got sick, bills grew like weeds, scholarships were not enough anymore. She had to drop out before her final year and find a job that paid now, not later. That job turned out to be carrying plates to people who would never guess that the quiet girl who brought their drinks could speak a language most of them only heard in movies. When she walked through the staff entrance that morning, the kitchen already smelled like coffee, garlic, and frying oil. Cooks shouted orders, plates clinked. Manager, a short man with a sharp voice, was already packing near the host stand with a clipboard in hand. "You're late by 2 minutes," he snapped when he saw her, even though she was actually on time. She knew better than to argue. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shook his head. "Big night tonight," he said. "We have important guests coming, a billionaire from the tech world and some foreign investors. Don't mess up." Smiles, no attitude, no mistakes. They're more important than you'll ever understand. The words stung, but they also felt familiar. People had been telling her things like that for years without using those exact words. She went to the locker room, changed into her black shirt and apron, slipped on her polished shoes, and pinned her name tag to her chest. When she looked in the small mirror on the wall, she saw a face that looked older than 24. There were faint circles under her eyes and a tiny worry line between her eyebrows. But there was something else, too. Behind the tiredness, there was a fire she could not fully hide. She whispered something in that other language under her breath, just a small sentence about strength, like a private promise to herself, then pushed the locker room door open and went to the floor. The day moved in a blur of small tasks. She refilled water glasses. She carried plates. She smiled at people who did not say thank you. She apologized for mistakes she did not make when guests got angry because their steak was too cooked or not cooked enough. In between orders, she checked her phone when she could, looking for any update from the hospital about her mom. There was nothing new, which was both a relief and a weight on her chest. During her short break, she went to the staff balcony, a small space at the back of the building that looked out over dumpsters and delivery trucks. While other coworkers smoked or scrolled, she took out her notebook again. The pages were covered in small, neat writing in that foreign language, along with little arrows and notes. She practiced under her breath, moving her lips silently, repeating phrases she had once learned from professors in bright classrooms. New server, a girl who had just started last week, stepped outside and raised an eyebrow. "What are you reading?" she asked. "Just old notes," the waitress said with a half smile. "From school. You went to college?" the new girl asked, surprised. "Yeah, for a while," she said. "What did you study?" "Languages," the waitress replied. "That one from Asia, the one that is really hard." The new girl whistled. "Wow, why are you here then?" The waitress looked down at her black shoes and said softly, "Life changed." Before the girl could ask more questions, the manager shoved the balcony door open. "Break time over," he barked. "We need all hands, and you," he pointed at the waitress, "you're on the special table tonight, the billionaire and his guests. Don't make me regret it. It's only because you never drop plates and you look presentable." There was a tiny flicker of pride inside her at being chosen, but it was wrapped in a thin layer of annoyance. "Yes, sir," she said. As evening came, the restaurant filled up. The city lights outside the windows began to glow, tiny stars on the ground. People laughed louder, glasses clinked. The staff moved faster. The waitress checked the settings on the special table 3 times, glasses aligned, cutlery shining, napkins folded just right. She wanted everything perfect, not for the billionaire, but because it was her job and she took pride in doing it well. Around 7 o'clock, she heard the soft chime of the elevator doors opening. The host straightened his tie and the manager hurried toward the entrance. The waitress turned to see who was arriving and felt a strange twist in her stomach. The man walking in wore a dark blue suit that fit him like it had been made just for him. His shoes were polished enough to reflect the ceiling lights. His hair was styled in that effortless way that actually takes a lot of effort. At first glance, he looked like any other rich guest. But as he stepped farther into the room, she heard the whispers. "That's him," one server murmured. "The app guy. The billionaire who started that huge company," another whispered. "He's worth so much money it's crazy." The waitress watched as he moved, confident, like he owned not just the room but the building beneath it. There was something cold in his eyes, like a person who had seen too many numbers and not enough real faces. With him were 3 guests, 2 men and 1 woman, who looked neat and serious. Their clothes were not as flashy, but their eyes were sharp and their posture was straight. The language the manager used to greet them in English was formal and careful. They smiled politely, but the waitress could tell from the way they looked at each other that they were more comfortable speaking among themselves in that other language. She knew it at once. She understood the little side comments they made, the soft jokes about the city lights, the way one of them admired the view, but she stayed quiet. She was used to being invisible. The host led them to the special table and the manager waved the waitress toward them with a tiny flick of his fingers. "Remember," he hissed under his breath as she passed. "Smile, be quiet, do what they ask, they are more important than you." It hurt how easily he said that. She swallowed the feeling and walked up to the table with her tray and her best polite expression. "Good evening," she said kindly. "Welcome, my name is." She gave the simple name on her tag, one that sounded normal and common, easy for anyone to say. "I'll be taking care of you tonight." The billionaire barely looked at her. He gave a short nod like she was part of the furniture, but one of his guests smiled at her and thanked her softly. She understood the simple word he used, even though he did not say it in English. It warmed her a little inside, like a small light. She took their drink orders, moved away, and came back with practiced grace, placing each glass in front of them carefully. As the night went on, the billionaire spoke in English at first, talking loudly about deals, numbers, and how his company was growing, making jokes about people who didn't work hard enough to escape small lives. Every now and then his guests would glance at each other, their faces polite but not fully relaxed. The waitress moved around the table, topping off water, bringing food, clearing plates. She said, "Excuse me, and here you go, and is everything okay?" She stayed in the background, but her ears caught every word. Then, as the main course arrived, something changed. One of the guests asked a question in that other language, speaking slowly, clearly, as if testing how much the billionaire really understood. The billionaire smiled like a man who had prepared for this moment. He answered in the same language, his words careful but proud. He was not perfect, but he knew enough phrases to impress people who did not know better. His guests gave him approving nods, and the manager, who did not understand any of it, stood a little taller near the bar, proud that his restaurant was hosting such an important conversation. The waitress felt her heart beat faster. The words floating over the table were familiar to her like old friends. Her tongue almost moved with them, wanting to join in to fix the mistakes, to make the phrases smoother and more natural. But she kept her mouth shut. She was not there as a speaker, just as someone who carried dishes in and out. Then it happened. The small moment when everything started to turn. She walked up to the table to refill their water, standing beside the billionaire's chair. She did her job quietly, her eyes lowered, her hands steady. As she stepped back, she heard one of the guests ask a question in that same language, this time indicating her with a little nod of his head and a curious smile, as if asking about the staff or the service. It was an innocent question, something simple about the restaurant and the city. The billionaire glanced up at her, then turned back to his guests. He smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the sharp smile of someone who liked to feel above others. And then, still in that foreign language, he answered. He did not know she understood. He did not know the girl standing beside him had spent years studying that language in classrooms and cafes, in libraries and late nights, even when her eyes burned from reading. He did not know she had once dreamed of working as an interpreter, of standing in rooms like this for a different reason. So he spoke freely. He said that waitresses here were basic and uneducated, that they were only good for carrying plates and smiling, that they did not understand real work or real value. He said they were decoration, like flowers on the table. He even joked that this one looked like she could not even read their menu in English, let alone anything more complex. His guests did not laugh. One of them shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat. But the billionaire kept talking, making light of the girl who was still standing there, holding an empty pitcher, her hand frozen in midair. The words hit her like small stones. She felt her chest tighten, her ears burn, her eyes sting, not because his words were true, but because he thought she would never understand. Because he felt safe stepping on her when he thought she was blind and deaf to his arrogance. For a second she almost did what she always did. She almost walked away quietly, swallowed the hurt, and told herself to forget. But something inside her moved. Maybe it was the memory of her mother in a hospital bed, thanking her for working so hard. Maybe it was the picture of her brother studying with the lamp on, trying to build a better future because she had given up hers. Maybe it was all those hours she spent learning that language, all those words she had loved so much. She felt a calm rush through her body, the kind you feel right before you decide to do something very brave or very dangerous. The restaurant noise seemed to fade. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the echo of his cruel words. Without thinking too long, before fear could grab her by the throat and pull her back, she took a small step forward. The billionaire's guests saw her move and looked up. The billionaire did not nod at first. He was still talking, still playing the role of the clever man who knew more than everyone else. Then softly but clearly the waitress began to speak in his chosen language. Every syllable was smooth, every sound exact. It did not sound like someone who had learned a few phrases to impress people. It sounded like someone who had lived inside that language for years. First she repeated his own sentence about her, the one that said she was uneducated and only good for carrying plates and smiling. She gave it back to him word for word, but this time the words came from her mouth, not his. His head snapped up. His eyes locked on her face in shock. Then she added more. She told him, still in that language, that true worth was not measured by the price of a suit or the size of a bank account. She said that respect was shown by how you treated the people who served you, not just the people who sat at your table. She told him that making jokes about someone who could not answer back did not make a man powerful, it made him small. Her voice did not shake, she did not shout, she did not insult him back with ugly names. She simply held up a mirror made of words and let him see himself. People at nearby tables began to notice. Conversations slowed, forks paused. The manager, standing across the room, frowned and started moving toward them, his shoes clicking on the floor. One of the guests covered his mouth in surprise. Another actually smiled, a tiny, impressed smile. The billionaire sat very still, his face pale under the warm lights. For the first time that evening he had no ready reply. The silence around the table felt heavy. The waitress felt all eyes on her, but she kept going, because after years of being quiet when people stepped on her, she had finally decided to stand up straight. She told him again in that same language that he was wrong about her and about people like her. She explained that she had studied this language for years, that she had once been on track to work in rooms like this as an equal, not as staff, before life forced her to leave school. She said she still carried those studies in her mind and heart, even while carrying plates. Her words were simple but strong, like clear water flowing over stone. Then she did one more thing. She spoke a sentence that made his guests straighten in their seats. It was about his company, about a deal he had made years ago with a small translation firm that he had once promised to support, and then dropped without warning, causing many people to lose their jobs. She knew about it because someone she loved had been caught in that storm. When she said it, the air around the table changed. The guests leaned in, suddenly very interested. The billionaire's jaw tightened. His eyes flashed with something that was not just anger, it was fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. For a moment, the waitress thought she might have gone too far. Her hands began to shake so softly that only she could feel it. She knew he could ruin her job with one word. She knew the manager was almost at the table now, his face red, ready to scold her in front of everyone. But another part of her whispered that some moments in life are bigger than fear. Some moments are not about keeping a job, they are about keeping your dignity. The billionaire finally found his voice. He switched back to English, his words low and sharp. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded. "How dare you speak to me like that in front of my guests?" The waitress looked straight at him, her heart pounding but her gaze steady. She answered in English now, her voice still clear enough for people at nearby tables to hear. "I am the person you thought you could insult because you believed I did not understand," she said. "I am the girl you called uneducated while you did not even know how much I know. I am the one carrying plates tonight, but that does not make me less human than you." Behind her, she could feel the manager arrive, his breath hot with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed under his breath. "Apologize at once or you're done here." The billionaire's guests stayed quiet, watching, waiting to see what happened next. The billionaire stared at the waitress like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a shadow in the room, but as a person standing in front of him, like a wall he had just crashed into. His hand clenched around his glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. The waitress took a slow breath. She knew she had one more choice to make in that moment. She could bow her head, apologize, pretend she had lost control. Or she could say the one thing she had wanted to say, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been spoken down to like they were nothing. Her lips parted as she prepared to speak again, and the billionaire's eyes narrowed, full of anger and something else he could not hide, worry. The manager reached for her arm to pull her away from the table, and at that exact second, she turned back to the billionaire and began to reveal the part of the story he never expected her to know. The part that tied his past choices to her life in a way that would shock everyone at that table and beyond. The manager's fingers closed around her arm so suddenly that it almost made her drop the empty pitcher. His grip was tight, his voice a hiss in her ear as the whole restaurant watched. "What do you think you're doing?" he whispered, his smile fake and stiff for the guests. "You're not here to talk, you're here to serve. Apologize right now." The young waitress could feel her heart pounding against her ribs so hard it made her chest hurt, but there was a strange calm sitting under her fear, like a quiet center in the middle of a storm. The billionaire sat in his chair across from her, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning into her face. His three guests were silent, their eyes moving between him and the girl who had just spoken to him in his own chosen language with more skill than he had. A few people at nearby tables pretended to look at their menus, but their attention never left the scene. The city lights outside kept shining, but inside that rooftop restaurant everything felt cold and sharp. For a moment she almost gave in. She almost let the old habits win, the ones that said, "Keep your head down, say sorry even when it hurts, protect the job, swallow the pain." Then she remembered the hospital room that always smelled like bleach and sadness, her mother lying there with a weak smile, apologizing for being sick when it was not her fault. She remembered her little brother sitting at their small table with his school books, telling her that one day he wanted to go to college just like she almost did. She remembered the email that had changed everything, the one that had ripped the floor out from under her family. That email had come from the same man now looking at her like she was dirt on his shoe. She had let that email break her once. She was not going to let this moment break her again. She gently pulled her arm out of the manager's grip and took one small step closer to the table, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough to show she was not going to disappear. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but steady. "Sir," she said to the billionaire, still using the foreign language for one long sentence so his guests could understand everything. "You asked who I think I am. I think I am someone who knows exactly what you did 3 years ago when you cut your contract with a small translation company and never looked back. One of the guests, a man with kind eyes and thin glasses, straightened in his chair as soon as she said the words translation company. He looked at her with sudden, sharp interest. The woman at the table set down her chopsticks and folded her hands, listening closely. The third guest glanced at the billionaire, whose face went from angry to stiff in less than a second. He understood exactly what she was about to talk about. He just never imagined that someone carrying plates in a black uniform would know about it too. The manager tugged at her sleeve again. "Enough," he muttered in English. "You're going to ruin everything. Leave now before you make it worse." But the guests had already leaned in. The man with the glasses lifted a hand politely toward the manager, asking him to wait. Then he looked at the waitress and spoke in English, this time so everyone near them could understand. His words were simple and careful. "I would like to hear what she has to say," he said. His tone was calm, but there was something firm underneath it, something that made the manager freeze in place. The manager's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but he did not argue. He stepped back one small step, his face red with anger, but he knew better than to openly fight with the people who might decide whether the hotel got a huge new contract or not. The waitress swallowed. Her throat felt dry, but she knew this was the only chance she might ever have to speak the truth directly to the man who had changed her life without even knowing her name. She took a slow breath, glanced at the billionaire, then at his guests, and let her mind travel back to the day everything started to fall apart. 3 years earlier, her life had looked different. She had still been in college then, walking across campus with a backpack full of thick books and a head full of dreams. She used to sit at the front of her language class, eager, always ready to raise her hand, always staying after to ask the professor extra questions. She worked part-time at a small cafe near the school, but her main job back then was studying. Her mother still had enough strength to work a few hours every day at a bakery, and her father had a job he loved at a local translation company. The company was not big, but it was careful and proud. They took projects from large businesses and made sure people on both sides could understand each other clearly. Her father would come home tired but smiling, and tell stories about how important it was to get the words right when people were trying to work together across languages. "Words can build bridges or walls," he used to say as he stirred his tea at the small kitchen table. "Our job is to build bridges." When she had been accepted into her college program, they had all celebrated in that tiny kitchen. Her father had bought a small cake with her name on it, and her mother had cried happy tears. There was never a lot of money, but there had been enough. Enough to pay rent, enough to buy food, enough to believe that if they stayed careful, everything would be okay. Then one day her father came home early. She remembered the way he walked in, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He sat down without taking off his shoes and dropped a thin envelope on the table. She had never seen his hands shake like that before. Inside the envelope was a letter from his company. The letter said that one of their biggest clients, a growing tech business that had once promised a long, steady contract, had suddenly pulled out. No warning, no slow reduction, just gone. The client had decided to build their own in-house team overseas to save costs. Without that big account, the translation company could not keep all their staff. They had to let people go. Her father was one of them. At first, he tried to play it off as something small. "It's okay," he told his family with a weak smile. "I can find another job. I have experience. People always need translators." But weeks turned into months, and every job posting he found either wanted someone younger, someone cheaper, or someone willing to move to another country. The rent notices started to pile up. Her mother took extra shifts even though her health was getting worse. The young college student took another part-time job on top of the cafe, cleaning offices late at night after studying. Still, it was not enough. She remembered the night her parents sat her down at the table, the same table where they had celebrated her college acceptance. Her mother's hands twisted a napkin into a tight knot. Her father stared at a small stack of bills and then at her with tears in his eyes. "We can't keep up," he said quietly. "You know we've tried everything. We're behind on rent. Your mother's medicine it's too much. We don't want to ask this of you, but there's nothing else." She knew what was coming before he said it. "You may have to take a break from school," he whispered. "Just for a while, work, help us catch up, then you can go back." A hot, heavy pain filled her chest like someone had dropped a stone inside her. School was not a game for her. It was not just something to pass time. It was her ticket, her way out, her proof that all the long nights and early mornings and careful savings meant something. "I can take more jobs," she had protested. "I can sleep less." "I can't. You already sleep on coffee," her mother interrupted softly. "Your eyes are always red. You are not a machine." She shook her head, tears spilling over. "We are so proud of you, but we also need you. We can't lose this home." So she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She went to the school office, handed over a form, and asked to pause her studies. The woman behind the desk gave her a sad smile and said, "I hope we see you back soon," but they both knew many students who took that break never returned. That same month, while looking for more work, she had searched the name of the client that had left her father's company. She wanted to understand how one decision from one business could hurt so many people. That was when she saw it. A news article with a smiling picture of the billionaire sitting at this table tonight. He was younger in the photo, in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, holding a microphone. The headline praised him for making bold cost-saving decisions by ending expensive outside contracts and building a lean global team. Deep in the article, there was one simple line about how his company had ended its relationship with a small local translation partner, saving millions. She had stared at that line until the words blurred. Millions saved for him meant months of fear for her family. It meant that letter on their table. It meant the form she signed to leave school. It meant nights where her father sat in the dark, holding his old company badge in his hands. She had never forgotten that. She had never forgotten his face. Now, standing in front of him in that rooftop restaurant, she finally connected the man in that old photo to the man in the expensive suit sitting at the table with his fancy watch and his cold eyes. She used no big or hard words as she told his guests this. She kept it simple enough that even a child could understand. She said that her father had worked for a small translation company. She said his job had allowed her to go to school and learn languages and dream big. She said that when the billionaire's company ended their contract suddenly, the small company fell apart and her father lost his job. She said they lost their balance, their savings, and eventually her chance to finish school on time. She told them she had seen the article where the billionaire was praised for his smart cost-cutting, and how that small line about the translation company had felt like a knife. The guest with the glasses listened with his mouth set in a serious line. When she finished describing that part, he looked at the billionaire and asked in that foreign language very quietly, "Is this true?" The billionaire's fingers tapped once on the table, then stopped. For a second he looked like he was going to deny everything. Then he realized he could not. The contract had been public. The article was still online. He could not rewrite history in front of people who had access to all the information in the world. So he took a slow breath and answered in their language, choosing his words carefully. He said yes, his company had ended that contract. He said it had been a business decision. He said he had not meant to hurt anyone personally. "I did what I had to do for the company," he added, switching to English now, as if that would make it sound better to the people listening nearby. The waitress felt something twist inside her. "You didn't mean to hurt anyone," she repeated softly. "But you did, you just didn't have to see it." The manager stepped closer again, panic growing in his eyes now. This was no longer a simple staff problem. This was turning into something bigger, something that could affect the restaurant's reputation. He forced a smile and bent toward the table. "I'm very sorry for this misunderstanding," he said quickly. "Our staff sometimes get emotional. She will be removed right away, and of course your meal will be—" "Stop," the woman guest said calmly, raising one hand without taking her eyes off the waitress. Her voice was not loud, but it made the manager fall silent. The woman turned to the waitress and spoke gently in that foreign language, asking her a question. The waitress understood every word. The woman wanted to know how she had learned to speak so well. The waitress answered in the same language, explaining briefly about her studies, about how she had loved the sounds and patterns of the language, about how she had once been chosen for an exchange program but could not go because of money and her mother's health. She kept it short, but the feeling behind her words was clear. The guests exchanged glances. The man with the glasses nodded slowly, impressed. "Her accent is very natural," he said in their language to the billionaire, but the waitress caught it. "Better than some people we have hired in our own offices." A faint blush touched the billionaire's cheeks, but anger quickly covered it. He did not like feeling shown up. He did not like being reminded that someone he had just insulted knew more than him in front of people he wanted to impress. "Her job is to serve food, not to give speeches," he snapped in English. "This is not the place for personal drama." The waitress felt her legs tremble, but she stayed where she was. "You made it personal when you talked about me like I was furniture," she said quietly. "You could have just asked the question about the staff in a respectful way. You chose not to." Somewhere behind her, a young couple at a nearby table pretended to be taking selfies with the city view, but their phone camera was clearly angled toward the billionaire and the waitress. A teenager at another table watched with bright eyes, his thumb hovering near the record button. The story unfolding in front of them was more interesting than anything on their plates. The manager whispered urgently, "Put your phone away," as he passed one table, but not everyone listened. The woman guest turned to the billionaire now, her face thoughtful. "You know," she said in English, "we have been discussing all evening values. You keep saying your company cares about people and culture and building trust in new markets. But you insult the person serving you in the very language you claim to respect. That sends a very different message." Her words were calm, but they sank deep. The billionaire opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a thin smile. "You're trusting the story of a stranger over the person you came here to meet. he asked, trying to turn the pressure away from himself. The man with the glasses shook his head. I am not choosing sides, he said. I am listening to behavior. And right now her behavior shows respect and courage. Yours shows something else. The billionaire's eyes flashed. For the first time that night he looked afraid not of the waitress but of what his guests might decide about him. The manager, sensing that the power in the room was shifting, tried one more time to fix things in the only way he understood. He turned to the waitress and spoke in a low, angry voice. You are done here after tonight, he said. If they stay, if they do not walk out because of you. You will not work another shift in this restaurant. You think you are brave, but you are just throwing away your job. The words hit her like a slap. This job was not perfect, but it paid for food, for rent, for bus rides to the hospital. Losing it would hurt. Her stomach nodded, but she lifted her chin anyway. Maybe I am, she said softly. Maybe I am throwing away something, but I am keeping something too. One of the guests tilted his head. What is that? He asked gently. She looked at the billionaire when she answered. My self-respect, she said. The room fell quiet again. Even the music from the speakers seemed lower. The billionaire shifted in his seat, annoyed, trapped, and exposed all at once. He needed to regain control. He needed to show his guests that he was still the strongest person at that table. Fine, he said coldly. You want honesty? Here it is. The world is not fair. I make hard choices so my company can grow. Sometimes that means other people lose. That is life. If your father's company could not survive one lost contract, maybe it was not strong enough. If you had to drop out of school, then maybe you should have worked harder to find scholarships or help, instead of blaming someone you serve drinks to. The words were sharp and cruel, and they sliced through her like glass. For a second she could not breathe, but then something unexpected happened. The man with the glasses spoke up again, and this time his voice was not calm. It was disappointed. That is not how a leader talks, he said, shaking his head. A real leader knows that numbers on a screen are not the only thing that matters. People matter, communities matter. You say you had no choice, but you never even saw the faces on the other side of that contract. The woman guest nodded. We have been considering investing in your company because we thought you understood the weight of your decisions, she added. Now I am not so sure. The billionaire's face went pale. This dinner was not just a nice meal for him. It was part of a bigger plan. He wanted their partnership. He wanted their money, their connections, their approval. He had assumed the night would go his way because it always did. Now a waitress whose name he had barely heard had turned the evening into something he could not control. The manager, sensing the danger, changed tactics. He forced a bright, fake smile and turned to the guests. We are very sorry for any discomfort, he said. We value you deeply. Please allow us to offer desserts on the house or perhaps a private room. No, the woman guest said simply. I would like to stay right here. Then she turned toward the waitress again. Do you have plans tomorrow? She asked suddenly. The question hit the waitress like a splash of cold water. She blinked, confused. Tomorrow, she repeated. I have a morning shift here, she said, glancing at the manager whose face was turning red again. Why? The woman guest gave a small, kind smile. Because my company is holding meetings at our hotel nearby, she said. We are expanding into this country and we have been struggling to find people who understand both languages well and also understand the human side of our work. I would like to speak with you more in a different setting, if you are interested, of course. The manager almost choked. She is not, she is just a server, he protested. She does not have any real qualifications. The man with the glasses raised an eyebrow. She speaks our language better than some of our interns, he said. She understands what your local people feel. That sounds like a real qualification to me. The waitress's hand shook again, but this time for a different reason. Hope, fear, and disbelief all crashed together inside her chest. She had not come into work tonight expecting anything more than sore feet and a handful of tips. Now someone from another country, someone sitting at the same table as the man who had once crushed her future, was asking if she wanted to talk about a different path. She did not know if it was a job offer. She did not know if it was real or if it would lead anywhere. But it was something, and something was more than she had dared to hope for in a long time. The billionaire saw the change in her eyes, the tiny light that flickered there, and it made him furious. This was supposed to be his night. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and took out a thick stack of cash. Without asking the others, he dropped it on the table, the bills fanning out across the white cloth. Here, he said coldly. If money is what you wanted, take it. Consider it a thank you for your little performance. Now you can help your family and stop blaming me for your problems. The money looked like a lot more than she made in weeks. The manager stared at it, his eyes wide, already thinking of how this could fix everything, the upset, the embarrassment, the lost job. Take it, he hissed at her. Say thank you, fix this, do not make him more upset. But the waitress did not move. She looked at the pile of money and then at the billionaire. For a few seconds she pictured what that money could pay for: rent, medicine, groceries that were more than instant noodles and the cheapest bread. She pictured her brother opening the fridge and seeing it full for once. Her mother holding a bag of fresh fruit. It would help a lot. And yet she also saw something else. She saw herself picking up that money and tying her dignity to it. She saw the headline in her own mind, "Waitress silenced by Cash after speaking up." She knew he was not giving this money because he cared. He was giving it so he could tell himself and his guests that he had done something generous. That he had fixed the problem with the one thing he understood: money. He was trying to buy the right to stay arrogant. Slowly, she shook her head. "No," she said quietly, "I will not take it." The words hit the table like a dropped glass. The manager gasped. A nearby guest actually whispered, "Is she crazy?" under his breath. The billionaire stared at her like he could not believe what he was hearing. "You're refusing?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea how much that is?" "Yes," she said, "I do, and I know it could help, but if I take it from you right now in front of these people, it is not help, it is payment to stay quiet. I will not sell my voice for a stack of bills." The man with the glasses let out a small breath, almost like a laugh of surprise mixed with respect. The woman guest nodded once slowly. The billionaire's eyes turned to ice. "You think you're better than me?" he asked. "No," she answered. "I think we are both just human. You just forgot that I am human too." There was a long, heavy silence after that. Somewhere in the room, a phone camera stopped shaking and focused more sharply. Across the restaurant, a young man who had been recording for the last few minutes glanced down at his screen, saw the length of the video, and without really thinking, tapped post to his social account with a quick caption about a billionaire, a waitress, and a language he did not even understand. He thought maybe a few friends would see it and laugh or make jokes. He had no idea yet how fast it would spread. Back at the table, the manager finally snapped out of his shock. "Enough," he said loudly, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "This has gone too far. You," he pointed at the waitress, "are finished here. Go to the back now. I will deal with you after our guests leave." For the first time, the billionaire did not argue with the manager. He leaned back in his chair, his face rigid, and crossed his arms as if he was done with the conversation, even though his heart was still beating fast. The waitress felt everything inside her twist. She had spoken her truth. She had kept her dignity, but now it was time to pay the price. She nodded slowly. Her eyes stung, but she would not let tears fall in front of him. She turned to the guests, bowed her head politely, and thanked them in their language for listening. The woman guest responded with a soft phrase, wishing her strength. The man with the glasses said they would talk again if she still wished to. She held onto those words like a small rope in a dark hallway. Then she turned to walk toward the staff door, each step heavy but steady. As she moved away, the billionaire let out a slow breath and reached for his glass, hopping to wash away the taste of the whole scene. Just as his fingers touched the stem, his phone buzzed on the table, then buzzed again and again and again. He frowned and glanced at the screen. The notification bar was full: messages from his assistant, calls from his office, alerts from social apps. A knot formed in his stomach. He clicked one notification, and a video popped up on his screen, already playing. It showed him sitting in the same chair, speaking in that foreign language. Subtitles had been added under his words, words he had just said about the waitress being basic and uneducated, and only good for carrying plates. The video then showed her answering him back in that same language, calmly and clearly, calling out his pride and talking about the contract that had crushed her family. At the bottom of the screen were numbers that made his mouth go dry. Views, likes, shares, comments rushing in faster than he could read them. The title above the video made his heart drop: "Billionaire tries to insult waitress in foreign language, gets exposed in front of everyone." The man with the glasses saw the change in his face and asked softly, "Is something wrong?" The billionaire did not answer right away. The phone buzzed again, another notification. Another message from his assistant with just 2 words: "We have a problem." As the waitress pushed open the staff door to the back room, not knowing yet what was happening on screens all over the city, the billionaire stared at his phone, his world tilting under him for the first time in a long time, and realized that the night was only just beginning to fall apart in ways he could not control. The door to the staff area closed behind her with a dull, heavy sound, and it felt like the whole world shrank at once, from glittering city lights and polished glass to gray walls, metal lockers, and the smell of old cleaning spray. The music from the dining room became a muffled hum, like it belonged to someone else's life. The young waitress stood there for a second, her hand still on the door handle, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had just talked back to one of the most powerful men in the city in front of his important guests. She had refused a huge pile of money. She had told the truth about her father and the contract that had wrecked their lives. And now she was about to pay the price for it. The manager followed her in almost at once, the door swinging behind him. His face was red and his eyes were wide, not only with anger but with fear. He checked quickly to make sure no other guests were around, then pointed toward the narrow hallway that led to the small office in the back. "In there," he snapped. "Now." She swallowed and walked ahead of him, her legs feeling like they were made of sand. The office was tiny, barely big enough for a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet with a drawer that never closed right. There was a clock on the wall that ticked too loudly and a small fan that only worked on its lowest setting. The manager closed the door behind them and dropped into the chair, rubbing his forehead with both hands for a moment before looking up at her with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he demanded. "This is not a cafe on the corner. This is a top-floor restaurant. You do not speak to guests like that, you do not embarrass them, and you do not drag your family problems into their dinner." She felt heat rush to her face, but she kept her voice calm. "He insulted me first," she said quietly. "He insulted everyone like me right in front of my face in a language he thought I couldn't understand. I didn't shout, I didn't throw anything, I told the truth." The manager slammed his hand on the desk, making a pen jump and roll. "I don't care," he snapped. "You think that matters? People like him pay the bills that keep this place open. They are the reason you even have a job. You went too far, way too far. You have put this restaurant at risk. You have put my job at risk." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she had not noticed before under his sharp edges: fear. He was scared of losing his position, his own sense of power. He needed people like the billionaire to feel safe. "You told me they were more important than I would ever understand," she said softly. "But I think I understand now. To you, people like me are only useful if we stay quiet." His mouth tightened. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, pulling open a drawer and yanking out a thin pad of paper. "I should fire you right now and send you home with nothing. But if I do that in the middle of service, I'll be short-staffed and everything will be even more of a mess. So here's what will happen. You are suspended from your next shifts until the hotel decides what to do. Tonight you stay in the back, no more tables, no more talking, you clock out early. We'll call you tomorrow." The word suspended landed in her chest like a heavy brick. It wasn't a final cut, but it was a blade pressed against the rope that held her life together. Rent, food, bus rides, hospital visits, all of it rested on this thin job, and now that job was shaking. "Do I still get paid for tonight?" she asked quietly, knowing it sounded small. The manager rolled his eyes. "You worked part of your shift, you'll get what the system says. But if that man complains, if he tells the hotel you ruined his evening, this might be your last paycheck from here. Do you understand that?" She nodded. Her throat felt tight. She knew better than to argue. "Go to the locker room," he said tiredly, waving his hand. "Change, wait there, don't talk to anyone, and don't even think about going back out there." She turned and opened the door, stepping back into the staff hallway. The noise of the kitchen reached her right away: plates clinking, cooks shouting orders, servers calling out table numbers. The world she knew, the one where she moved fast and smiled and said yes of course, was still spinning without her. As she moved past the kitchen door, a few coworkers glanced at her. Some looked worried, some looked curious. A few looked annoyed, like they couldn't believe she had been stupid enough to talk back to someone rich. One of the younger bussers, a thin boy who always wore his cap backward when the manager wasn't looking, slipped closer as she passed. "Hey," he whispered. "Are you okay?" She forced a tiny smile. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "What happened out there, we heard bits of it, but I was clearing plates." She shook her head. "It's a long story." He hesitated, then glanced around to make sure no one was watching too closely. "You need to see this," he whispered, pulling his phone out of his apron pocket. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. On the screen, a video was playing. The image was a little shaky, like it had been filmed from across the room by someone trying not to be seen. It showed the special table with the billionaire and his guests. It showed her standing beside the table in her black uniform. She watched herself on the screen repeat his cruel words in that foreign language, then answer him clearly and calmly. Even though the sound wasn't perfect, the important parts were clear. Someone had added subtitles in English across the bottom, typing out every line as if they had listened carefully and translated it. Under the video, she saw a familiar line from her own story about her father losing his job because of the contract. The caption under the video was simple: "He tried to insult the waitress in a language she didn't know." She knew more than he ever expected. Her heart slammed against her ribs. At the top of the screen was a small bar that showed how many times the video had been watched. The number kept jumping higher even as she stared at it. It had already been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in so fast her coworkers' screen couldn't keep up. People were calling her brave. People were calling him names she didn't like, even if she understood why they were angry. Some were talking about how they had also been treated badly at jobs by rude customers, how they wished they had spoken up like she did. Others were writing from other countries, saying they were shocked at how good her language skills were. "This is from 15 minutes ago," the busser whispered, almost breathless. "My cousin follow that guy who posted it. Look at the numbers, it's going crazy." Her hands shook as she held the phone, her own face staring back at her from a tiny bright screen. She had never seen herself from the outside like this. She looked scared in the video, but she also looked stronger than she felt right now in this narrow hallway. "I didn't know anyone was filming," she whispered. Well, they were, the busser said, and the whole internet is watching now. Footsteps sounded nearby and he quickly pulled the phone back, tucking it into his pocket as the sous chef came rushing by with a tray of plates. The waitress stood there for a second longer, then forced herself to move toward the locker room. She pushed open the door and stepped into the smaller, quieter space where staff changed clothes and kept their bags. For the first time that night she let herself sit down on the wooden bench. Her legs were tired and weak, and her brain felt like it was buzzing. On one side fear whispered about rent and bills and her mother's medicine. On the other side a tiny spark of something else flickered to life. It wasn't exactly hope yet. It was more like a small question. What if this moment didn't end her story? What if it changed it? She sat there for a few minutes just breathing when her old phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She took it out with shaking fingers. There were more notifications than she had ever seen at once. Missed calls, messages, social app alerts from accounts she barely used. She ignored most of them and tapped the one that mattered most, a message thread from her younger brother. The newest text at the bottom said in all caps, "Is that you in this video? Call me now." Her stomach flipped. She checked the time. It was late, but he was clearly awake. She quickly typed, "I'm still at work. I'll call when I'm out." He replied so fast it made her jump. "Mom is watching it too." She closed her eyes. Of course the video would reach them. News traveled faster online than any bus or phone call. For a second she pictured her mother in the hospital room, holding the cheap phone they shared, watching her daughter stand in a fancy restaurant and say things they had all felt for years but never had the chance to say out loud. She wasn't sure if that thought made her feel proud or sick or both. Somewhere above her in the restaurant the story was still unfolding. While she sat on the bench trying to steady her hands, the billionaire stared at his phone, his world tilting. The video was not just on one platform. It had already jumped to others. People had clipped it, remixed it, slowed it down, added bold captions and angry fonts. Some had paused the video on his face as he dropped the money on the table, adding words like arrogance and "this is why people hate the rich" across the screen. Others had focused on her, putting "she said no" in big letters under the moment she refused the cash. The comments were ruthless. Some people mocked him for speaking the language poorly. Others dug up old articles about his cost-cutting decisions and began sharing them again, asking questions about who had been hurt. One comment in particular made his blood run cold. It was from an account with a simple name, Old Bridge Translator. The comment was short. "I used to run a small translation firm that lost its biggest contract when this man pulled out with no warning. We closed our doors." Good to see at least one of the people affected finally got to say something to his face. Hours ago, that would have been just another random voice online, easy to ignore. Now with his guest sitting across from him at the table and watching his expression, it felt like every word was a spotlight. The man with the glasses leaned forward. "Your phone will not stop buzzing," he said quietly. "Is that related to what just happened?" The billionaire forced his jaw to relax. "It seems someone recorded our conversation," he said through tight teeth, "and posted it. People exaggerate online. It will pass." The woman guest tilted her head. "We will see," she said. Her own phone buzzed and she checked it silently. A moment later the same video appeared on her screen from a different source, already translated with subtitles into her own language. A news account from her home country had picked it up, adding a headline about worker respect and cultural hypocrisy. Her eyebrows rose just a little. This was moving faster than even she had expected. The manager hovered by the bar watching them, wiping glasses that were already clean. He could not hear their quiet words, but he could see from their faces that the mood at the table had changed completely from the cheerful tone it had at the beginning of the evening. Finally, the woman guest set down her phone and folded her hands again. "I think we need to be honest," she said to the billionaire. "Part of our interest in your company was your strong image. People trust your brand, they see you as smart and future-focused. But if this video is already spreading this fast, your image is changing. People won't just see a clever leader anymore. They will see someone who insults workers when he thinks they cannot understand." The billionaire opened his mouth, then stopped when his phone lit up again with a call. It was his assistant. He pressed his lips together and rejected it. A second later a text came in. "Board group chat is blowing up. They want a statement. Call me ASAP." The man with the glasses checked his own notifications and sighed. "Our head office has already forwarded this to me," he said politely. "They are asking if this video is real and if we are still comfortable going forward with this partnership. I will need to be careful about what I tell them." The billionaire suddenly felt trapped by the very technology that had once made him rich. Phones, apps, platforms, all the things he had used to build his empire were now turned against him in a matter of minutes. He set his device face down on the table for a second, as if hiding it would make the problem smaller. "You are basing a major business decision on one emotional moment," he demanded. But even he heard how weak that sounded. "No," the woman guest replied calmly. "We are basing it on what that moment shows about your character. Moments like this are not accidents. They are windows." The lights of the city outside blinked and shimmered. Inside, the air felt thinner. Finally, the man with the glasses took a slow breath. "We will not decide everything tonight," he said. "We will go back to our hotel, speak with our teams, watch how you handle this publicly, and then give you an answer. For now, I think it is best if we end the evening early." They stood up together. The billionaire rose too, his jaw tight, his chest aching with angry frustration he could not show. The manager scrambled over, bowing his head and thanking them for coming, offering apologies for any discomfort and promising to make things right. The guests thanked him politely, but their minds were elsewhere. As they walked toward the elevator, the woman guest glanced once toward the staff door as if she could still see the young waitress standing there. She whispered something in her own language to the man with the glasses, and he nodded, making a mental note. Behind them, the billionaire stood at the table alone for a moment, staring at the untouched dessert plates that had been placed there out of habit. The tower of sweets in front of him looked silly now. He grabbed his phone, checked the screen, and finally answered his assistant's call as he walked toward the private exit. "What's the damage?" he asked in a low voice. On the other end, his assistant spoke fast. "The video has over 500,000 views already across platforms. It's trending in 3 countries. People are tagging our company account nonstop. Some old employees from that translation firm are commenting, saying you ruined their lives. There are already calls for a boycott from some loud voices." "They don't know the full story," he said sharply. "They never do," the assistant replied. "But it doesn't matter, they know enough to be angry." "What does the board want?" he asked, swallowing hard. "They want you to fix it," the assistant said quickly. "Some are saying you should issue a public apology. Some are saying you should explain the business reasons. A few are quietly talking about looking into your recent behavior. They're nervous." He clenched his teeth, apologized publicly to a waitress. In front of the whole world, the idea burned his pride, yet the fear of losing billions, losing deals, losing his position burned even hotter. "We'll talk in the morning," he said. "Draft some options for statements, nothing that admits too much." He hung up, stepped into the elevator, and watched the door slide shut. His reflection stared back at him, trapped in the mirrored walls. For the first time in a long time, he did not like what he saw. In the staff locker room, the waitress changed slowly out of her uniform, folding it neatly into her small backpack. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she answered her brother's call. "Are you okay?" he blurted out before she could even say hello. His voice was high and shaky with excitement. "You're on like every page I follow. People are talking about you everywhere." She sat back on the bench, letting the sound of his voice calm her a little. "I'm all right," she said. "I'm scared. I think I'm going to lose my job, but I'm all right." "You were amazing," he said. "Mom cried, but the good kind of crying. She said she never thought she'd see someone speak to a man like that and say those things. She kept saying, 'That's my daughter,'" her throat tight. "Is she okay?" she asked. "She shouldn't get too stressed." "She's okay," he replied. "She's tired, but she's proud, and you should see the comments. People are saying you're a hero. Some people are trying to find out who you are." "Oh, and look," his voice faded for a second, then came back. "There's a comment from some company account. I think it's the same one on those people's name tags at his table. They wrote, 'If anyone knows how to reach this waitress, please contact us. We would like to speak with her.'" The words made her heart stumble. "Can you send me a screenshot?" she asked. "Already did," he said. Her phone buzzed and an image popped up. It showed her own face frozen mid-sentence in the video, with a blue check-marked account underneath asking politely if anyone had contact information for her. Part of her wanted to laugh. The guests from the table did not even know her last name. They had not seen her employee file, her address, her emergency contacts. All they saw tonight was a girl in a black shirt who refused to stay quiet, and yet they were reaching out. "Do you think it's real?" her brother asked. "What if they're just saying that to look good?" She sighed softly. "I don't know," she admitted. "But even if it's just words, it's more than we had yesterday." A knock on the locker room door made her jump. "Come in," she called, slipping her phone into her bag. The door opened and the busser from earlier stuck his head in. "Manager says you can go," he said. "He already closed your shift in the system. He was grumbling about you all night, but he also just got a call from upstairs. The hotel director wants to talk to him in the morning. He looks like he's going to explode." She winced. "That's not good." "Maybe it's not all bad either," the busser said quietly. "People out there were talking. Some guests said they're never coming back if he fires you. Others said they will tell their friends about this place, but not in a good way. I think the hotel cares what the internet says now." She nodded slowly. The world was moving in ways she could not control. For once, maybe that could work in her favor. "Thanks for showing me the video," she said. "Hang in there," he replied. "No matter what happens, that was brave." She slung her bag over her shoulder, took a last look at the name tag still sitting on the locker shelf, then left the restaurant through the staff exit. The night air hit her face like a splash of cold water. The city lights blinked from every direction. She walked to the bus stop, feeling both smaller and bigger at the same time, like one tiny person in a huge world who had somehow touched more people than she could see. On the bus ride home, she kept her eyes on her hands. A few times she caught people staring at her like they were trying to place her face. A teenager a few seats away was watching a video on his phone with the volume low, and for a second she thought she heard her own voice. She turned her head away, cheeks burning. When she reached her neighborhood, she stepped off the bus and walked the short distance to their old apartment building. The stairs creaked as she climbed them. The hallway smelled like cooking and old paint. She opened the door to their small place and was hit at once by the warm smell of soup and the soft glow of their only standing lamp. Her brother rushed at her, almost knocking her over with a hug. "You're home," he said, pulling back to look into her face. "Are you really okay?" She smiled weakly. "Tired," she said. "But yes, where, Mom?" "In the bedroom," he replied, pointing. "She's been waiting for you. She tried to sleep, but she couldn't. She keeps asking me to replay the video, then tells me to stop, then asks again." The waitress laughed softly, then walked down the short hallway to the bedroom. The room was small, barely big enough for the bed, a chair, and a tiny table with a few medicine bottles on it. Her mother lay against the pillows, her hair thinner than it used to be, her face lined with both age and sickness, but her eyes were bright when she saw her daughter step into the doorway. "There she is," her mother whispered, her voice a little hoarse. "My brave girl." The waitress sat carefully on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. It felt warm but fragile. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said. I couldn't let him talk about us like that." Her mother shook her head. "You did what you had to do," she said. "I never thought I would see someone stand in front of a man like that and tell him how his choices felt to people like us. Your father would have been proud." The mention of her father made her chest ache. He had passed away the year before from a sudden stroke, his body worn down by stress and long months of job hunting that never led anywhere. He never got to see her speak like this. He never got to see the man whose signature had turned his life upside down, forced to listen to the consequences. "I wish he could have heard me," she whispered. Her mother squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. "Maybe he did," she said softly. "Maybe he knows." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the city muffled outside the thin walls. Then her brother came in with his phone. "You need to see this," he said, sitting on the chair. "The video hit 1 million views, and look," he tapped and scrolled. "There are news pages talking about it now, big ones. Some are asking questions about that contract Dad lost. They're writing about how big companies hurt families when they cut deals. They're using our story even if they don't know our names yet." The waitress felt her stomach twist again. She wanted people to understand, but she also worried about strangers knowing so much about their lives. "What about him?" she asked quietly. "What are they saying about him?" Her brother hesitated. "Honestly," he said, "it's not good. People are calling him heartless. Some say they're deleting his app. Others say they're never buying from his brand again. Some think it's just internet anger that will die down, but others are already making videos explaining everything. And look at this." He showed her another clip, this one from a late-night show host who had already made a joke about a billionaire who thought he was the smartest person in the room and ended up outsmarted by someone carrying a tray. The audience laughed and clapped. It made her feel strange, hearing her pain turned into a joke, even if the joke was on the man who had hurt her. "I didn't want it to become a circus," she murmured. "I just wanted him to see me, to see us. Maybe he sees us now," her mother said quietly, "and maybe the world does too." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, thinking it was just another stranger, but something in her gut told her to look. The message was short, written in polite, clear English. "Good evening. This is from the team of the guests who sat at your table tonight. We would like to meet with you tomorrow morning if possible to talk about an opportunity. We can meet at the lobby cafe of the Grand Meridian Hotel at 10 a.m. if you're willing. Please reply yes." Her breath caught. She showed the screen to her mother and brother. They both leaned in. "Do you think it's real?" her brother asked again. "Their number had country code from their homeland," her mother said slowly. "And they knew where they were staying. It sounds real to me." The waitress stared at the message. Opportunity, the word felt heavy and dangerous and bright all at once. "What if it's just them trying to look good online?" she whispered. "What if they just want to film me and make some big show? Then you listen and walk away if it feels wrong," her mother said gently. "But if they are honest, if they really want to help, you cannot let fear close the door before it even opens. You have worked too hard, you have carried too much, at least hear them." Her brother nodded hard. "You always told me to try, even when I'm scared," he said. "Maybe this is your turn." She took a deep breath, her thumb hovering over the screen. It felt like those moments in class when a teacher had called on her and she had to answer in the foreign language, heart pounding, hoping she didn't mess up. She had no idea what would happen if she said yes, but she knew exactly what would happen if she said nothing. Nothing would change. Finally, she typed 3 letters, yes, and hit send. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in a quiet, expensive hotel suite, the phone of the woman guest buzzed. She smiled when she saw the answer, then walked over to the small table where the man with the glasses sat with his laptop open, reading fast. "She said yes," the woman announced. He looked up, relief crossing his face. Good, he said, we need to move quickly. This could be a chance to do something meaningful not just for her but for our image as well. And maybe even for him if he's willing. The woman's smile faded a little. Do you really think he will be willing? She asked. The man sighed. If the pressure gets high enough, he may have no choice, he said. Our office told me the board is already pushing him to make some kind of visible apology, something that shows he understands what he did. They think if he stands next to her, if he publicly makes things right somehow, the anger might calm down. The woman frowned. I do not like using her as a tool, she said. She is not a prop. She isn't, the man agreed. That is why we need to give her real choices, not just one path that benefits him. If we make any plan that involves both of them, she must agree freely. If not, we help her in a different way. She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. Meanwhile, in a different expensive room in a different part of the city, the billionaire sat alone on a leather sofa, his tie loosened, his phone screen glowing in his hand. The room was quiet, but his mind was loud. The board had sent him a long message. Some directors were furious, others were cold. One paragraph stood out over all the rest. You have 48 hours to control the narrative. We suggest you publicly apologize, show humility, and demonstrate values that match the ones we claim to stand for. If you cannot do this, we will be forced to reconsider your position. He had built this company from nothing. He had worked nights, slept in the office, taken risks no one else would take. He told himself he had earned the right to be blunt, to be tough, to say whatever he wanted. But now all that work sat on a cliff edge, balanced on the opinion of strangers staring at a video on their phones. He remembered being young, standing in a grocery store with his mother, watching her count coins and put things back on the shelf they couldn't afford. He had promised himself he would never live like that. He had promised himself he would be strong enough that no one could ever look down on him again. Somewhere along the way, he had turned that promise into a shield and then into a blade, cutting people before they could ever hurt him. But tonight, a girl in a black uniform had shown him that his blade could be turned back toward him. His assistant knocked on the door and came in without waiting for an answer. We need to talk about tomorrow, the assistant said. I've spoken with the guests' team. They're planning to meet with the waitress in the morning. The billionaire stiffened. Without me, they invited you too, the assistant said carefully. They think it would be wise for you to attend. They want to discuss a possible public event. Maybe a joint statement, maybe something bigger. If you ignore them, they might walk away from the deal completely. He felt anger rise. So they want to parade me out like a bad child and make me say sorry while the cameras roll. The assistant didn't flinch. They want you to show that you understand that your words hurt real people, he said. And the world wants to see if you're capable of that. The billionaire threw his head back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. He thought of the waitress's face when she refused the money. He had expected her to grab it to say thank you, to let him cover the whole ugly scene with cash. Instead, she had pushed the money away and held on to something he had forgotten the shape of a long time ago, dignity that couldn't be bought. Finally, he lowered his head and looked at his assistant. Set the meeting, he said in a low voice. I'll be there. 10 a.m. Grand Meridian Lobby Cafe, the assistant replied. They'll confirm in writing. The billionaire nodded, his jaw tight. Good, he said, but understand this. I won't let anyone turn me into a puppet. If I apologize, it will be on my terms. The assistant opened his mouth as if to say something else, then thought better of it and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Back in the small apartment, the waitress lay awake in her narrow bed long after her mother and brother had fallen asleep. The city hummed outside. Her phone lay on the chair beside her, buzzing every few minutes with new messages, new comments, new tagged posts. She turned it face down so she didn't have to see the light. Her head was full of pictures. The restaurant, the table, the guests' faces, the pile of money on the white cloth, her own shaking hands, the look in the billionaire's eyes when he realized she understood every word he had said. Mixed with those images were new ones she had never allowed herself to imagine before. Sitting in an office where people actually wanted to hear her speak the language she loved, walking into a building not as a server but as a professional, feeling proud instead of scared when checking her bank balance. It all felt too big, too far away, and yet also suddenly too close. Somewhere in the swirl of thoughts, fear whispered again. What if this was all a trick? What if tomorrow was just another way to make her look small? What if saying yes had been a mistake? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the way she used to before big exams. Back then she would repeat one simple sentence in that foreign language, one that meant "I can do this," over and over under her breath. She whispered it now in the dark, not as a student, but as a woman standing on the edge of a change she could not see clearly yet. Morning came too quickly. The sun pushed through the thin curtains, painting weak gold lines across the wall. Her brother had already left for school, leaving a note on the table. "You're going to do great, don't let him scare you." Her mother sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her face pale but determined. "Are you sure you feel well enough to be alone for a few hours?" the waitress asked, worry creasing her brow. Her mother smiled and waved a hand. "I will be fine," she said. "The nurse is coming by later." "Don't think about me when you should be thinking about your words." The waitress put on her best clothes, not fancy because she didn't own anything fancy, but clean and carefully pressed. A simple blouse, dark jeans without tears, her only pair of shoes that still looked new from a distance. She pulled her hair back in a neat low bun and put a touch of balm on her lips. In the mirror, she still looked like herself, just a little more awake. She took the bus again, but this time she wasn't going to serve anyone. She was going to sit at a table and be heard. When she stepped into the lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, she felt small for a moment. The ceiling was high, the chandeliers sparkled, the floor shone like water. People in suits walked past her, their shoes clicking. She walked toward the cafe on the far side of the lobby, her heart thumping with every step. As she got closer, she saw them. The woman guest and the man with the glasses sat at a corner table, a folder and a tablet in front of them. They looked serious but not unkind. Between them there was an empty chair for her. She took a deep breath and walked over. "Good morning," she said softly. They both stood up at once. The woman gave her a warm smile. The man with the glasses bowed his head slightly in respect. "Good morning," the woman replied. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." As she slid into the chair, the woman glanced past her toward the lobby entrance, then back at her. "Before we begin, there is something you should know," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. "We invited someone else to this meeting as well. He has not arrived yet, but he said he is on his way. We did not want to surprise you, but we also did not want to make decisions without you meeting face to face." The waitress felt a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't need the woman to say the name. She knew the empty space at the table was not just for her, it was for him too. "You mean," she began. The man with the glasses nodded. "The man from last night," he said. "He agreed to come. Our board, his board, and the internet are all watching how this is handled. We want to offer you options, but one of those options may involve him. We will not force anything. You will choose, but we thought it best that you hear his offer in person." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She turned slightly, looking toward the lobby doors just as they slid open again with a soft whoosh. A tall figure in a dark suit stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. For a second their eyes met across the lobby, hers full of nerves and memories, his full of pride and pressure and something new she couldn't quite read yet. He started walking toward the table, each step bringing the past and the future crashing together in the middle of that bright hotel cafe, and she realized that whatever he was about to say next could change both of their lives in ways neither of them had planned for. The billionaire crossed the lobby with his shoulders a little less straight than the night before, like the weight of the whole internet was riding on the back of his suit jacket. And the waitress watched him come closer with her hands locked together under the table so he would not see them shake. And by the time he reached the empty chair beside the woman and the man with the glasses, the soft buzz of the hotel had faded to a low hum in her ears. Because this was not like the restaurant where he could hide behind his money and his guests and his fake smile. This was a bright morning with no music, no dim lights and no easy escape, just a table, 4 chairs, and the truth sitting between them like a fifth person. He stopped, looked at her, hesitated for just a heartbeat, and then pulled out the chair and sat down, setting his phone face down on the table as if he was tired of seeing himself on the screen. Up close in the daylight, he looked older than he had under the restaurant lights. There were faint lines around his eyes and a tiredness in his face that came from more than just lack of sleep. For a moment nobody spoke, and the waitress could hear the clink of cups from the barista station, the soft drag of a suitcase on the floor somewhere behind her, even the tiny buzz of the light over their table. Finally, the woman broke the silence with a quiet, steady voice, speaking in simple English so there would be no hidden meaning, nothing that anyone at the table could pretend not to understand. She said they were grateful the waitress had come and grateful the billionaire had agreed to show up. And then she said something that made both of them straighten in their seats. She said that this meeting was not just about business, not just about saving one deal or one image, but about something bigger, about what kind of people they all wanted to be when money and power and fear were taken out of the room, and all that was left were 4 humans sitting together. The billionaire let out a small breath through his nose, like he did not fully agree but also did not know how to fight that without looking even worse. And the man with the glasses opened a folder on the table and slid 2 printed pages toward the waitress and the billionaire, explaining that their teams had spent most of the night talking across time zones, and that they had an idea, not a final plan, but a path that might turn the damage into something different. something that did not erase what happened, but used it to build something better. The waitress looked down at the paper in front of her and saw simple words. No legal tricks, no tiny letters, just a rough outline of what they were thinking. A public event where the billionaire would apologize in front of cameras, not just to her, but to all workers he had hurt with his words and choices. A fund set up in partnership with their company to help small businesses and translation workers who had lost contracts due to big cost-cutting deals. A scholarship in her father's name for students studying languages who could not afford to finish school, and a job offer for her not as a server, but as a cultural and language consultant to help them build better bridges when they moved into new countries, so no one in the room would ever again be invisible. Her eyes blurred on the words and she blinked hard, trying to make sure she was reading them right. It felt too big, too wild, like something pulled from a movie instead of her real life that yesterday still smelled like spilled soup and worn bus seats. The billionaire scanned his own copy, and she watched his jaw clench when he read the part about apologizing publicly. His hands tightened on the edges of the paper. When he finally looked up, his eyes landed on her, and there was a strange mix there now, anger, yes, and hurt pride, but also something softer, something that looked almost like shame that didn't know where to sit. He cleared his throat and spoke in a low voice that shook just a little at the edges. He said he had not slept much, that every time he closed his eyes he saw the video replaying in his mind, not just the part where he insulted her, but the moment she refused his money and looked him in the eye and reminded him that she was human. He said he had spent years telling himself that he was just making hard choices, that business is business, that if people got hurt it was because they were not strong enough to survive in his world, and he said that when he started out, when he was young and broke and sleeping on an office floor, he promised himself he would never again let anyone talk down to him or make him feel small. And somehow that promise had twisted over time until he had become the one making others feel small so he didn't have to feel that way alone. He did not cry, but his voice went rough when he said that last part, and the waitress realized something she had not wanted to see before, that under his sharp suit and shiny watch, there was a scared boy who had built walls so high he could not see over them anymore, a boy who had confused power with safety. The man with the glasses listened quietly and then said this was not about digging up every old wound, it was about what they did now. The past could not be changed, but the future was still soft like wet cement, and this was their chance to make a different mark in it. He turned to the waitress and told her that nothing in those pages would happen without her clear yes, that they would not drag her onto a stage if she did not want that they could still offer her a private job and support her family in other ways, but that he and the woman believed the world might need to see what happened next with their own eyes because people had watched her stand up to power, and if she disappeared now with a quiet deal, it would teach the wrong lesson. It would tell the world that everything still ends in secret rooms and private payments. The waitress's heart pounded so loud she was sure they could all hear it, because she was not someone who liked being watched, she was not a person who dreamed of cameras and bright lights. She used to freeze even when called to write on the board in front of her class, and the idea of standing on a stage next to him with the whole internet watching made her feel like her skin was too tight. But she also thought of all the comments she had seen last night from people in uniforms like hers. From cashiers and janitors and delivery drivers and hotel cleaners and call center workers and nurses and teachers and factory workers and students who all said the same thing in different ways. You spoke for us. You said what we couldn't say. I wish I had done what you did. She thought of her father stirring his tea at the small kitchen table and saying that words could build bridges, that good translators did not just move words from one language to another. They moved understanding from one heart to another, and she wondered if maybe this was what he meant, if maybe this moment was about more than her own life, even though her own life was the one shaking in its shoes. She took a deep breath and asked a simple question that surprised all of them because of how small it sounded inside a big problem. She asked the billionaire if he was willing to say sorry even if no deal depended on it, even if no board had told him to, even if the cameras were off and there was no money on the table, if he would still feel sorry for what he did to her family and to her, or if this was all just about keeping his position. The billionaire looked like she had slapped him, not because the question was rude, but because it went straight past his defenses and grabbed the one thing he had tried to hide even from himself. He stared down at his hands for a long moment, then looked up, and what came out of his mouth next did not sound like a speech from a man used to winning but like something raw and unscripted. He said that if there were no cameras and no deal and no angry internet, if it were just him and her in a quiet room, and if he still knew everything he now knew about her father's company and the way that contract had crashed into their lives, then yes, he would be sorry, truly sorry, not because he had meant to hurt them, but because he had never bothered to even look, and because he had treated her like she was less than human just because she was wearing an apron instead of a suit. He said he did not know how to fix years of careless choices, but he knew he did not want to keep being the man in that video, the one his younger self would have hated. The woman watched his face carefully and then turned back to the waitress, asking in a gentle voice what she wanted, not what anyone else thought was best, not what would look good, but what would let her stand up straight years from now when all the noise had faded. The waitress thought of a future where she stayed in the restaurant if they even kept her, always wondering what might have happened if she had stepped through this door and said yes. She thought of a future where she took some quiet money and changed phones and disappeared from the internet, always looking over her shoulder as if she had done something wrong instead of something right. And she thought of a future where she faced her fear, walked onto a stage, and told her story on her own terms, not as a victim, not as a prop, but as a person who had been given a chance to turn pain into something solid that could help other people climb. Her voice shook only a little when she said that if they were going to do this, then it could not just be a show. She wanted the scholarship in her father's name to be real and long-lasting, not just a one-time gift. She wanted the worker support fund to be built in a way that actually listened to the people it was supposed to help, not just people in suits guessing what was needed. And if she agreed to stand beside the billionaire, she wanted to speak in her own words first before him, so people would hear her voice without it being filtered through anyone else. The man with the glasses smiled for the first time that morning, a small, proud smile, and said that those were good conditions, strong and fair, and that he believed they could be met. The woman nodded and added that their company would put money into the fund as well, not just the billionaire. Because this was not about one bad man, it was about systems where people like him were rewarded for ignoring the faces behind the numbers. Then she turned to the billionaire and asked plainly if he would sign his name under all of that, not just with his pen but with his actions over years, not just days. There was another long silence, and then he nodded slowly, like a man who knew that stepping back would cost him even more than stepping forward, because he had already been judged by the world. And now the only way to climb back up was not with excuses but with open hands. He agreed, and right there at that small cafe table, they all signed an early draft of the agreement, not as a final legal document yet, but as a promise in ink, something that could not be erased just by switching off a screen. When the waitress left the hotel later that morning, the world outside looked the same as it always had, cars honking, people rushing, vendors calling out. But inside she felt different, like someone had taken all the heavy pieces inside her and turned them around so they fit together in a new way. Over the next 2 days, everything moved fast. The news channels picked up the story and added new layers, some clumsy, some kind. Some hosts treated her like a symbol, some tried to turn it into a joke, but the video of her words kept spreading, and as the details of the new fund and the scholarship and the planned event leaked out, people started arguing less about whether she was right and more about what this meant for how big companies treated small people. The hotel called her to say the manager had been moved to a different department, and that she was welcome to return to her job while everything was sorted out, but she thanked them and said gently that things were changing for her, and she would not be staying. She did not say it cruelly, but there was a quiet power in turning down the place that had once made her feel like furniture. Her mother's health did not magically get better overnight, but something in her brightened as she watched her daughter in small clips on TV and online, speaking clearly without hiding behind a serving tray. Her brother walked through school hallways hearing classmates whisper about the Waitress video, and felt a strange mix of pride and protectiveness when they realized she was his sister. He watched as some teachers used her story in class to talk about language and respect and courage, and for the first time he felt that the pain their family had been through was not just a private storm, it was now a story that might help other people. Finally, the day of the event came. It was held in a large hall that usually hosted conferences and big weddings, but today the stage held 2 chairs, a small table of water glasses, and a simple backdrop with 3 logos: the billionaire's company, the guest's company, and a new symbol for the worker support fund that looked like 2 hands reaching across a small gap. Cameras lined the back of the room. Reporters sat in rows, some with notebooks, some with tablets, all with questions already formed on their tongues. An audience of invited workers, former employees from the old translation firm, students studying languages, and regular people who had followed the story online filled the seats. When the waitress walked onto the stage, her knees shook so much she thought she might fall, but the sound of people clapping carried her forward. They were not cheering like fans at a concert. It was warmer and slower, like the sound you make when someone walks into a room after a long, hard journey. She sat in one of the chairs and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere near the front she saw her brother, his eyes shining, and next to him her mother in a wheelchair that they had rented for the day so she could attend, a blanket over her legs and a small, proud smile on her face. On the other side of the stage, the billionaire sat in his own chair, his hands folded, his eyes tired but open. When it was her turn to speak, there was no script in her hand, only a few notes she had scribbled the night before. She did not talk in clever phrases. She told the story the way it had happened to her, the way a child could understand. A father who lost his job when a big company left without warning, a daughter who dropped out of school to help, a mother who got sick, a restaurant that paid just enough to keep them afloat, a language she had loved that became a secret shield in her heart, a night when a powerful man spoke over her like she was invisible, and a moment when she decided to stop shrinking and speak up, even if her voice shook. She looked right at the cameras at one point and said that she knew not everyone could risk their job to say what she said, that sometimes you were trapped and needed to survive, and that she did not judge anyone for staying quiet, but she hoped that even if they could not speak to a boss or a customer, they would speak kindly to themselves and remember that their value did not depend on anyone else's opinion. She talked about how easy it was to believe the lie that people with money and titles were more, and people in aprons and uniforms were less, and she said the truth she had learned the hard way, that the job you do does not decide how worthy you are, the way you treat others does. When she finished and the room clapped again, there were tears in more than just her own eyes. Then it was the billionaire's turn. He stood instead of sitting, not because he wanted to look taller, but because his legs would not stay still. He took a slow breath and for the first time in his public life started with three small words that he had always thought made people look weak. He said, "I was wrong." He said he was wrong to treat her like she was less, wrong to speak in a language he thought she did not understand just to make himself look clever, wrong to cut contracts without thinking about the families behind them, wrong to hide behind the idea that business is business, as if that meant it lived in some clean space away from human hearts and human costs. He did not try to blame stress or tiredness or his childhood. He mentioned those things, but only to explain, not to excuse. He said he had lived a long time thinking that strength meant never bending, never admitting fault, and always staying on top no matter who got stepped on, and that now he was starting to learn that real strength was being able to look at yourself, even when you did not like what you saw, and choosing to change anyway. Then he did something that no board could have forced him to do. He turned away from the crowd and the cameras and faced her directly, and he said, "I am sorry," to her alone, using her first name for the first time in a voice that meant it. And even though that did not erase the past, it shifted something in the room like a window opening. After the speeches, they showed the details of the new fund on a large screen, explaining how it would work, how workers could apply, how they would bring in actual staff from affected companies to help decide how the money should be used. They showed a simple slide with the scholarship name, which carried her father's full name in clean letters, and for a second the waitress could not see the stage at all because tears filled her eyes and blurred everything. But she did not hide them because these were not tears of shame now, they were tears of love and loss and something healing. The twist none of them had fully expected came later, after the event, when people from the old translation firm lined up to speak to her. One older woman stepped forward and said she had worked in the office for years and that she remembered her father bringing pictures of his children to his desk. And then she pulled a worn photo from her purse and showed the waitress a younger version of herself grinning with a book in her hand. She said her father used to say, "My daughter will go further than I ever did," and that he had once turned down a job overseas because he did not want to leave his family, even though it would have paid more. He chose dinners at that small kitchen table over fancy meetings, and now, in a strange way, his choice had circled back and placed his name on a scholarship that might send other students overseas in his place. The waitress felt her heart crack open and fill at the same time, and she realized then that stories did not always end in a straight line. They bend and loop, and sometimes things that break you become the very things that carry others. In the months that followed, nothing was perfect. Some people still criticized the billionaire and said he was only doing all of this to save his company, and maybe a part of that was true. But she watched his actions over time and saw that he kept showing up to meetings no cameras recorded, that he sat in rooms with workers and listened without interrupting, that he changed hearing practices and put cuts in his own pay package before cutting staff. She started her new job with the guest's company, sitting in meetings where her language skills were not a party trick, but a tool that helped people understand each other better. And every time a leader asked for her opinion on how their message would sound to local workers, she remembered carrying plates in that rooftop restaurant and smiled to herself at how far words could travel. Her brother worked harder in school, knowing there would be a scholarship waiting for him too if he needed it, and her mother received better care thanks to the new salary and support, though some days were still hard and doctors could not fix everything. Sometimes strangers still recognized her on the street and said, "Aren't you that waitress from the video?" And she would laugh and say, "I'm more than that, but yes, that was me." And they would tell her how her story had helped them ask for respect or leave a bad job or simply hold their head higher. One evening, long after the loudest part of the story had faded from the news, she sat in their small living room with her mother and brother, the window open to let in the city air, and they watched a short documentary someone had made about the whole event. It showed clips of the restaurant, the video, the meeting, the stage. And then it ended with a quiet scene of her walking into a language classroom to talk to students about why she still loved words even after everything words had been used to do to her. When the video ended, her brother turned to her and asked if she ever wished she had just kept her head down that night, if she ever wanted to go back and choose the easy silence instead of the hard truth. She thought about the fear, the risk, the lost job, the shaking hands, the long nights, the pressure, and then she thought about her father's name on that scholarship, about the workers' fund helping people she would never meet, about the billionaire slowly learning to speak a different kind of language with his actions, about the quiet messages she still received from people in uniforms who said, "Thank you for reminding me I matter," and she shook her head with a soft smile. She said that fear always offers you a fake safety, a small room with locked doors, but that real safety comes from knowing who you are even when someone with power tries to tell you that you are nothing. She said she would not wish the pain on anyone, but she would not erase the courage either because that courage had pushed back against a whole way of thinking, one that said money decides who can speak. At the very end of her story, when she lay in bed that night with the city lights blinking outside the window just like they had on the night everything began, she whispered a small sentence in that foreign language she once learned just for herself, not to impress anyone, not to fight anyone, but as a promise. A promise that she would keep using her voice not to humiliate, not to crush, but to remind people that the quietest person in the room is often the one carrying the heaviest story, and that listening to that story can change more than any deal on a screen. And if you have followed this journey all the way from that first cruel sentence in a busy restaurant to this moment of hard-earned peace, remember this whenever you feel small. Your value does not shrink because someone fails to see it. Their vision is what is broken, not you. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or gave you courage to stand a little taller in your own life, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this story you will carry with you into your next hard moment. Because sometimes the words you share today become the strength someone else needs tomorrow.